I was telling Mr. Bedi that I saw him yesterday, and I think my connect is cinema. I mean, and I was humming in my head, "Waqt thoda sa, abhi kuch aur guzar jaane de." It was a film called Seema, and we used to watch that song time and time again. So it's such a pleasure being with you, Mr. Bedi.
Thank you, Sudha. Thank you so much.
And what a voice, my God. God, yeah, I know. So, I read his book, and this is the book, and I think everybody who loves life should go get it. And what came across for me was the entire Satyam Shivam Sundaram concept. I just feel that as a person, it's very obvious that you've been eternally in love with beauty. And it comes through books, it comes through the kind of people that you met, loved, in the settings you found yourself, across the world. You're the kind of person who's actually blessed, Kabir, to be bestowed with the ability to find beauty, even in what I'm very pessimistic. So therefore, when I look at you, I'm so envious, because when you read this book, you seem to have found beauty in everything. I mean, do you want to talk a little about that? Because all of us today in this world need that spirit, as it were.
Thank you, Sudha. Let me start off by talking about the beauty of this fantastic place that we are sitting in. This Fushi resort, created by Sonu Shivdasani and his wonderful wife, Eva. And I thank the jailer for transporting us to such a lyrical location that feels like paradise. And to be talking about my book in such a wonderful location, in such a wonderful event, is a very special feeling. So I begin by celebrating that beauty first.
Yes.
I have always liked beauty. I've always said to people that, surround yourself with aesthetic things. They don't have to be expensive. You don't have to be rich to surround yourself by buying a beautiful candle stand or even a beautiful ashtray. It's just a matter of taking the trouble to find something that's beautiful. I think that's an important aspect of things. But I think it also comes from a desire to look on the positive side of things, where even in the worst of situations, you look at the wider picture and then count your blessings. Of course, in my relationships, I have met some extraordinary and beautiful women who have been part of my life. I've been in countries and situations that are beautiful, but all of us have experienced beauty in so many ways. My sense is that the desire to seek out beauty is part of what a person's creativity is about. I think anyone who's creative has that sense of wanting to seek out beauty or make things more beautiful or express them more beautifully. And I think that's part of my makeup. It's part of my DNA. My parents didn't have a whole lot of money. They were freedom fighters, and they lived very simply and sacrificed a lot to give their children good education. But there was always a sense of using language in a beautiful way, decorating a house in a beautiful way. So that sense of aesthetics, of wanting to make the best of your environment, the best of the way you express yourself, the best of the way you perceive the world, that has come from them largely, and I give them great credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful, and that's what I was going to talk. First of all, also before I proceed, you're creative, you're a man of cinema, and it shows through the book. I mean, you read the book, there is a film in that. I think you can easily pick this up and give it to somebody to make a film. It's ready script, I think, and with dialogues, So the screenplay is ready, so anyone who wants to really do a film. So when you were writing this book, did you think of it in frames? Or, you see, writers employ different tactics, as you must know. There is always the Aristotelian way of doing the beginning, the middle, and the end. But how do you look at each chapter? I mean, non-fiction looks at it chronologically. This is really not chronological, if you look at it. I mean, you go from one to the other. There are different phases. So did you see it as a film when you started writing this book, or not really?
You know, I honestly did not set out to write this as a film. And it's not written that way, actually. Because the title that I have is Stories I Must Tell. Because there's so many stories in my life across 3 continents and 3 film industries. It would have been, you know, a 1,000-page tome if I sat down to write all the incidents that happened in my life. So I had to distill this and figure out. And for about 10 years, I had this paralysis of analysis, wondering how I'm going to tell my story. And with the coming of the COVID pandemic, I said, okay, this is my great opportunity to actually sit down and write the book, which is what I did. And I did so because I forced myself to think through how I'm going to tell the story. And the only way that seemed best was to choose the seminal stories of my life and create each one into a chapter. And each chapter goes back and forth in time. And that way I would at least cover the stories that I must tell, rather than all the stories that I can tell.
Yes.
And the subtitle of my book is The Emotional Life of an Actor. I think the word emotional life is important because it's not just about the acting, it's about what a human being goes through in different situations in life, personally, professionally, etc. So, when I talk about some of the relationships that I'm in, for instance, I delve very deeply into them. It's almost like a film script in those segments because they're actual scenes. You could be a fly on the wall watching this drama unfold before you, word for word, blow for blow, emotion by emotion. And this emotional perspective gave me the ability to draw from my past those incidents very vividly. And some of it was very painful to go through because I had to relive them. Some were very joyful to speak about and think about and write about. But for me, the writing of this book was something that I said, where I can be vivid, I will be as vivid as possible.
Right.
Where I have to be a little philosophical, I'll be philosophical. Where I have to be dramatic, I'll be dramatic. And my sense of how to tell things was also shaped by 2 things. One is the fact that I spent 5 years of my life in advertising before I became an actor. And I was trained as a copywriter by greats like Jason DeCuna and Alec Padamsee and Frank Simoes and others. And so I learned writing with the economy of words. My mother was a beautiful writer, and I learned from her also. But also in doing all these films that you do, you're doing stories, you're telling stories. And all scripts essentially have to deal with the issue of how to keep the interest of the reader at all times. And this was one of the big challenges for me, is to keep them, once they begin my chapter, to keep them riveted to that chapter.
True. Yeah.
And that came from a lot of the drama and dramatics and acting that I did, and being part of scripts where I read how people did that. Because I always say to readers, to people, your job is to buy my book and start reading it. My job is to keep you reading it. And that's what I set out to do, to write it in a way that was as interesting as possible, so that people, once they start, are just compelled by it, which is why I had to leave out so many of the side stories.
Right.
Often I say in my book, but that's another story. Because
Yes,
if I
you
go
always,
down,
you always say that's another story. Yeah.
If I go down that route, you lose the main plot.
Yes.
And I wanted to keep people focused and riveted to the main story that I was telling in each of my 7 stories.
And it's so riveting that I completed the book in a day. I mean, just sat in the morning and I was done. I didn't get up. You know, a lot of people feel that we are products of the times that we live in when we are born. You know, for instance, I witnessed the Mandal Commission. I witnessed also very tragic events like Rajiv Gandhi's death. And those were the times. And of course, there was also pleasure. You know, Rakesh Sharma going up and saying, Sare jahan se acha Hindustan hamara. So, you know, the times that you were born in, and that you devote, you know, considerable time to that. your childhood. Country is going through a churn. You know, we are witnessing partition. And your shift from Kashmir to Delhi, and even in Delhi, living in different places. Do you think that the times that you witness, Kabir, makes you the kind of person that you are? Because I tell you, I mean, it clearly comes out. Sensitive to all faiths, yes, maybe because of your parents, but also the times that you live in. You know, very accommodating towards human frailties. I mean, it's like, this is how I am. You are like that. Good for you. Bye. Congratulations. I don't think I can be friends with you, but hey, I'm going to smile at you. Do you think being able to adjust, you and your sister, you know, you adjusted to a lot of situations. Did that make you also the actor that you were and also the human being that you are today, Kabir?
You know, on frailties, I'm able to be tolerant of other people's frailties because I'm tolerant even of mine. And as I've spoken about in my book, I have not hidden any of my frailties either. But what's important to me is, of course, I'm a reflection of the times I grew up in. And my parents were these incredible people. They're freedom fighters. And theirs is another huge story, which I have written about.
Yes.
And growing up in that early years of India's independence and then being part of the whole 60s and the whole turbulent change that happened and coming of age in that time, when the whole world was going through this political, social, cultural revolution, and my meeting the Beatles, who were represented, and interviewing them, was that they represented the whole age of not just great music and all the fantastic bands of the time, from the Rolling Stones to the Pink Floyd to the Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, that entire generation that came to Woodstock. But also this changing social pattern, where the pill had been invented and great sexual freedom came, and the kind of rigid formality of the 50s gave way to this free-flowing hippie culture. People were demonstrating for peace for the first time in history on the streets of America against the Vietnam War. Clothes became psychedelic in Carnaby Street. And this was the kind of revolution happening abroad, and we wanted to certainly to be part of it. And we were the original bohemians of Bollywood, my wife, first wife, Prathama, and me. And we wanted to be part of that. And of course, growing up and seeing and coming to Bollywood and then being part of Bollywood of the 70s and 80s and then Hollywood of the 80s, 90s, and then Italy in between and all the wonderful things that happened to me that made me a star in Italy. All those things absolutely affected me deeply. They made me who I was as a person. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because I thought, you know I've got a very interesting story. Not just my story, the story of my parents, the story of my children, the story of the relationships, story of the film industries across the world. I know I have to tell my story. The how is what stumped me for many years.
Right.
But it was important for me to share my story, the ages that I lived through, and their influences on me and the happenings, including, I was friends with Rajiv and Sanjay Gandhi as a child. I met so many extraordinary people in showbiz, the great Italian stars of the age, all the Sean Connery.
And when you met Rajiv later and he said, "Kya kare yaar, kahan phas gaye?" That's what he said.
Rajiv and I started together at the Haley School, at Mrs. Gauba School on Haley Road. And Rajiv was a year older than me, Sanjay was a year younger than me. And we got to know each other and like each other, and I'd be called often to their house, and I went to the Prime Minister's house very often and play with their toy trains, which they had a room full, which went around on these tracks and signals that went up and down, and the colors that changed from red to green and all that. So it was a childhood friendship that sort of grew. And after he became Prime Minister, I went to visit him in the Prime Minister's office.
Yes.
And he popped his head out of the door, and all these heavy-duty ministers were sitting there waiting to meet him. And he said, "Come, Kabir, come." And I entered the room, and he closed the door behind him, and he gestured to the expanse of the Prime Minister's office and said, "Kahan phas gaye yaar?" where I got stuck, buddy.
You know, that pretty much summarized that he was a reluctant prime minister.
Yeah. Well, I said, listen, you have become prime minister now. You better get serious about it. He said, don't you tell me about serious.
Everyone
else tells me to be serious. Yeah, my buddy, let's talk about other things. And we did.
Yes. And also, you know, I think Usha Tukji, she will understand, and also Muzaffar Bhai, you will understand. When he went and interviewed the Beatles, and you know, those were the days when you could enter, he was just very charming. He spoke to Brian. He said Brian was rude to him. Eventually got into the room, met all the stars, Paul, John, Ringo was sitting there, George was there. He does that interview, brings it back, and guess what? The nightmare that we all have dealt with when it comes to Sarkari, you know, this thing, that someone had taped something else on top of that interview. And he said, where is that interview? He said, wo to use ho gaya, kuch aur us pe tape kar. Look at Usha ka, you know, the way that was...
Fortunately, it was broadcast before it was erased. But when I went for it, they said, nahi mil raha sahab, nahi mil raha. I said, what do you mean nahi mil raha? It's my interview with the Beatles. It's the most important thing. I could have sold it to anybody in the world.
Yes.
They said, no. Inquiry was launched. Sahab, kya hua? They didn't have money for tapes. So they taped over my interview to interview somebody else. And this single incident was so traumatic for me that it was literally the last straw in my relationship with All India Radio that forced me to leave them. And I left for Bombay, as it was called in those days, with 700 rupees in my pocket to find a new life for myself. So in retrospect, I must thank them for their sensitivity and lack of budgets, because who knows, I might still be working in Doordarshan if they hadn't ruined my interview.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, you don't move, like you said, with 700 rupees to Bombay. And that time in Bombay, I think, you know, when you read about those times, and a lot of people have written about it, Dom Moraes wrote about it also, those were fantastic days. So I'm speaking creatively, you know, a lot of us may not remember, a lot of us may remember, you know, it's about great people in the creative field, whether it's Alec Padamsee, it's Mr. Dakuna, this is Shyam Benegal. You know, they're all working for an ad agency. Shobha De is modeling for them. That's the first time, I think, with Pratima Ji and, you know, Shobha De, they were doing this. And he was actually, you should read that chapter, he was really dying to pee. And he wanted the golden key, and he goes into that room. But I mean, you should talk about that, but what you should talk about is, I think, to a great extent, you know, those people, those men and women, they pretty much set up a benchmark for what Bombay became later. I still refuse to call it Mumbai. So that's what it became, you know, creatively. There was an expansiveness to it. It was not stuck in silos, as it were. Would you agree?
Well, you know, every generation creates their heroes, creates their role models, as there are being created even today. But in those days, certainly, it was the Justin DeCunas and Frank Simoes and Alec Padamsee and Kersi Katrak, Usha Katrak, all these people that became legends in their lifetime. Even Suresh Marik and Ranjan Kapoor and all these people set huge benchmarks in the industry. And it was my good fortune that I was hired by Justin DeCuna at Lintas. And it was the best possible grounding I could possibly have, because not only because it gave me great advertising grounding, but because my boss was Alec Padamsee. And Alec Padamsee realized I was an actor because I had acted in my plays in college and with a group in Delhi called Yatrik, run by Joy Michael. And it was the most fortuitous thing that could happen to me, because he first cast me in a play called Marat Saad, which I played a small role in, which he liked so much, they cast me as the lead in Tughlaq. And Tughlaq was Girish Karnad's first play in English, and Alec Padamsee was directing it. And it was a fantastic play. And Alec was a great showman. And you know what he did was, for the opening scene of the play, he had me standing with my back towards the audience, arms outstretched, top light on me, looking completely naked. And so the minute the curtains opened, people saw this naked man on stage. There were gasps in the audience. And and then, of course, the royal courtiers come on, they dress the king, and then the king turns around and begins his opening oration. So, even though the play was spectacularly directed with Bombay's best actors and posters by M.F. Hussain and great set decoration and all the things that make a great play, the one thing people talked about was my butt, as it was transpired on stage. But that got me known by the whole of Bombay and therefore by the whole film industry, and therefore that's why I started receiving my offers. And I didn't come to Bombay looking to be an actor. I wanted to become a filmmaker, which is why I joined advertising, thinking I'd make advertising films and learn my craft there. So when the offers came from Bollywood, I thought, okay, I don't want to rise to account director and all these things in advertising. Maybe if I join the film industry and have these skills, I will find my road as a director. And I joined the film industry with the intention of being a director. But various things happened, acting kept happening, and a lot of films, and a few early hits in my career, most especially a film called Kache Dhage. And then the Italians came and they were looking for the right actor for this epic role of Sandokan in a very well-known novel of the last century. And because I was an actor and I was tall and bearded, which is what they wanted, and athletic, they asked me to come to Rome for a screen test. I went there, I nailed it there. So everything really started from these role models that gave me the opportunity to become who I became,
right,
and created the path for me. So I'm extremely fortunate to have these people.
Yeah, but did you really become, because you talk about how you would meet directors and producers, you would chat them up about politics, about what's going on, dekhiye desh mein kya ho raha hai, vagera, vagera. And they were, even now, I mean, a lot of them talks about box office numbers, Friday ko kya hua, hit ho jayegi, over the weekend. You did not belong there. Do you think still the industry works? You really need to belong. I mean, you need to belong there, or else you're just standing outside, or has it really changed? I've heard this from several people, that it took them years really to get into that, gang.
Sudha, I have been an outsider in every industry that I've been part of.
Okay.
I was the outsider in Bollywood because I really didn't come from that, from a Hindi-speaking background. I had to learn it. I spoke Punjabi very well, but Hindi I had to learn. I was the outsider who was catapulted to major stardom in Europe because of the Sandokan series that I did that became so iconic that even today it is shown, and it broke every record in Europe at the time and got shown over and over and over again till now. I was the outsider when I went to Hollywood because I wasn't American. They weren't writing roles for Indians. I always battled in industries as the outsider. And yet, each in my own way made whatever little mark I did in different places, some more than others. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write my story as well. Because apart from nobody knowing about my life, nobody's even seen all my films. In India, they might have seen some Bollywood films of mine, they might have seen the James Bond film Octopussy that I did, but they haven't seen most of my American series.
Yeah.
The Americans have seen all those series, but they haven't seen my Bollywood work, nor my Italian work. I would say 40% of my life's work has been in Italy.
Yeah.
And nobody here has seen that. So I wanted to tell this extraordinary journey that I went through in terms of the industries and the films that I did, but also talk about my own life and where I came from and the influences on me philosophically, in a religious way, in a social way, in the influence of my parents and the times that I lived in. So these were all reasons I had to write my story.
Yeah.
And coming back to your question of the iconic people in the advertising industry, of course, Shyam Benegal worked one floor below me in ASP, and he was aspiring to make films. We both used Govind Nihalani as our cameraman. And we used to use Jagjit Singh to compose jingles for us. You know, so those are the times that we set out in.
Yeah, Usha Uddhavji is smiling because she also, you know, she has those stories.
Hi, Usha.
She has those stories and more.
And Usha was iconic from those days as well.
Absolutely.
Still is.
It still is. Goddess. I mean, a round of applause
You
for
adore
someone
her.
who was so iconic.
Hats
really.
off, hats off. Usha.
Hats off. I mean, I really, Usha Uddhavji, yes, and from that time. You know, the success of Sandokan, of course, is legendary. You were speaking about it. You know, Kabir, what was interesting at that point when you read that chapter is that there was, I don't think it was real stereotyping. You know, you speak about stereotyping later and about Hollywood being almost, you know, following a caste system and it's so insular. But you were discovered because you were tall, you were absolutely smashing looking, you had a beard. So it was more that they found Sandokan because you were the right fit, not because, like, they had a parda, no, they didn't know who you were. So it was just the way you looked, right? It was not anything else. It was not stereotyping.
You know, where I lucked out with Sandokan was on two fronts. One is that the hero of the Sandokan story is an Asian pirate who fights the British Empire. And so he had to be Asian. Secondly, this was a European co-production between Italy, Spain, and Germany. And the only language they could agree on in common was English. So they were shooting it in English, and they wanted an Asian actor. And they found me in Bombay when they came. They came actually not just to Bombay, they came to look in 10 cities of Asia. And I was the first actor they met. They still went to the other cities.
Right.
But they gave me the chance to come to Italy and do the audition, and at my cost. I said my cost because, you know, when they first say come at your cost to do the audition, first your ego kicks in. What do they mean, come at my cost? I'm not some struggling actor. I'm a well-known actor in India. I've got hits out here. How dare they treat me like this? But then a better sense prevailed and said, look, this is a great opportunity being offered to you. Don't just dismiss it because of ego issues. Take it. And I did. So recognizing opportunity is also a very important part of my life and its journey. It's also sort of guidebook for people in terms of the things to look out for and also the mistakes to avoid, because I've chronicled both in great detail in my book. Because I did that also for myself, for my family, but also for people that know me, are fans of mine, and think they know my life, but don't. And therefore, it's important that they got the whole picture.
Yeah, so I'm going to, there are lots of questions I have, but I'll have to, if I don't mention these, I think, you know, I'll be lynched later. The women in your life, all of them beautiful, you know, you just go through one woman after the other, and I wish, you know, men treated women like that. Praveen, I mean, I must say this, you know, the way they are treated, you know, there is this crazy unpredictability of Pratima, Parveen Babi, so vulnerable, you know, and your present wife right now. I mean, the positivity she brings. Of course, we hear about Persis in between. We hear about a British wife. We hear about several affairs. But Kabir, you wouldn't have been the man you are if the women did not exist in your life.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I learned immense things from them. And you know, most of the major relationships in my life are not exactly one-night stands. They were 5, 7 years. I've been with Parveen now for 17 years.
Wow.
And we've been married for 7 years. So these aren't one-night stands. And also, I must say, one of the minor achievements of my life, or major achievements, if you see it in another perspective, is that I remained friends with all my ex-wives.
Yes.
Because those relationships ended for whatever reason they ended.
Those letters and the meeting, you know, I mean, it was so beautiful.
Yeah, so I've certainly give great credit to the women in my life for all that they did bring into my life. Yes, things don't always work out or pan out or the way you think. I mean, no one gets married with the idea of getting divorced. But if things don't work out or people change or circumstances change and a journey has to come to an end, it's best to end it in the most graceful way possible. as Sahir Ludhianvi said, जिस अफसाने को अंजाम तक लाना ना हो मुमकिन, जिस अफसाने को अंजाम तक लाना हो ना हो मुमकिन, that story which cannot be brought to its conclusion, उसे एक खूबसूरत मोड़ पर छोड़ देना बेहतर है.
अच्छा.
Better to leave it at a beautiful bend in the road.
चलो एक बार अजनबी बन जाएं हम दोनों. Yes, absolutely. You know, also when you read the book, I mean, you read it in your head, right? So, your conversations with all the women. So, I mean, I read it like this. How would you read it if it was some... That's because of the man you are. Are you once again having an affair, Pratima? Kish, are you? Yes, I am. I mean, this has become a habit with you. Just make up your mind what you want to do. I just want to leave. Okay. This is how I read it. I didn't read it like, are you having an affair, you know, with that aggression at all? I mean, there doesn't seem to be aggression at all in your relationships. Or maybe I read it because I'm biased or I, you know, formed a picture.
Well, you know, all relationships are volatile. All relationships are volatile. There's no such thing as a relationship that's placid, because that would be a very boring relationship. But I think, as far as Prathama was concerned, we were the children of the 60s.
Yes.
We wanted to be part of this thing. We got married only because our first daughter Pooja was on the way.
Yeah.
And I figured that, you know, it's all very well having whatever ideas you have about free love and living life in your own style, but you can't subject a child in India to having parents that are not married. Those days, just Prathama and me living together caused newspaper headlines and magazine headlines. So I didn't want to have a child with unmarried parents. So we got married for that reason. So now we had a traditional marriage. And then, as things progressed, and we both were guilty of a number of infidelities, and we came to a point saying, let's just have an open marriage and be done with it. And we had an open marriage. And what are the consequences of the open marriage? And all that I have explored in the book, because there's no such thing as things happening without consequences, especially when you're going against the social norm. And with Parveen also, there was a lot of volatility, because, you know, I've clubbed Parveen's story with my story of the Sandokan.
Yes.
And I did that because the major part of our relationship took place when I went to Italy with this incredible success, a Beatlemania that I witnessed across Europe, and especially in Italy and Spain, while Parveen was going through a slowly deteriorating mental state. So there was this extraordinary dramas that were created. And also, you know, she was a much bigger star than I was in India. And suddenly she was the arm candy of this new star in Italy. And it didn't sit very comfortably with her. There was a time when we were invited to dinner by Gina Lollobrigida.
Yes, that chapter, yes.
And Gina and Sophie Loren were the two greatest divas Italy had produced for the international market. So to be invited to dinner by Gina was something really special. And we went to this dinner, and to cut a long story short, Gina refused to talk to Parveen. We went to her house, met her friends, and she introduced me to everybody, and Gina just wouldn't talk to Parveen. And the plan was then we went to this restaurant in Rome where there was just Gina and me and Parveen and the manager of Air India in Rome who had conveyed the invitation. And then we arrived there, and Gina said, let's dance to me. And we started dancing. And we danced, and she was thrilled to know that I knew a lot of her films and was chatting. And because she'd been rude to Parveen earlier, I knew Parveen's temperature would be rising, so I said, let's get back to the table. Got back to the table, and so Gina turns to her very imperiously and says, and you, my dear, what are you doing here? Following the star? And I was just shattered. I mean, here was Gina Lollobrigida, our host for the evening, insulting the woman that I love. And I was stumped for a moment. And Parveen, who was, apart from being beautiful, was very sensitive and very intelligent. She looked at Gina and said, no, my dear, I'm here because I have a man. She says, I'm here with my man because I have a man. And Gina, of course, was single. So it was a huge bar with Gina and Brigida. And Gina said, oh, she's very clever. I said, yes, she's very clever, very good. Then Parveen said, let's dance. And we went to the floor, and she said, I'm leaving. I said, leaving what? She said, I'm leaving the restaurant. I said, you can't walk out of a dinner with Gina or Brigida, for God's sake. She said, you do what you like. I don't like this woman, I'm leaving. I said, but listen, Gina is a very important person. You can't just diss her like that. You do what you like, baby, I'm leaving. And I had literally from here to there to decide when she walked back to the table whether I was going to stay with Gina or leave with Parveen. And I was in this horrible dilemma. And then I saw Parveen pick up her bag. And I saw that stricken look on her face. And I thought, okay, no matter how big a star Gina is, she has insulted the woman I love. And I will stay with my woman. And I said to Gina, Gina, I'm terribly sorry. We have to leave. I hope you understand why. No, no, dinner is coming. Where are you going? You must come to my house. I said, Gina, sorry, we have to leave. And that is the end of my first and disastrous meeting with Gina Lollobrigida.
And I'm so envious of you, Praveen. I mean, what a sensitive man you have in your life. And I wish that sensitivity, all men brought that, Your chapter on Siddharth, I cried.
Yeah.
I cried. You speak of the guilt that parents go through and you kept questioning yourself.
Yeah.
Don't you think you're being super tough on yourself, Kabir? I mean, at that juncture or even...
Well, Siddharth, my son, he was a genius. At the age of 23, he graduated from Carnegie Mellon, which is the mecca of the IT industry, at the dawn of the computer age. This was in 1995. And he had the whole world at his feet. And then he got schizophrenic. And we didn't know what was wrong with him. We've tried various things for a couple of years to figure out what was wrong with him. He tried various things. He tried yoga, he tried therapy. They never diagnosed schizophrenia. And eventually he had this violent outburst in Montreal where it took 8 policemen to nail him down and admit him to the psychiatric hospital before we realized he really had schizophrenia. And then I brought him to my home in Santa Monica, right on the beach in Los Angeles, where I had a nice Victorian kind of house. And he had a room of his own, and we set about giving him the best treatment at UCLA Medical Facility, UCLA, and other facilities. But the problem was, he was so bright, he had already gone on the internet and figured out what the prognosis was. Now, I must say that drugs today are far more effective than they were in those days, but the dilemma was that drugs prescribed to him, he didn't like because they made him feel numbed. They kind of sedated him to be safe for society, but they didn't give him a sense of being alive. And it was my job to enforce the fact that he had to take those medicines. And the days he didn't take the medicine, he felt wonderful. So look at the situation it puts you in. And then he realized that it was a life he didn't want. He started talking to me about suicide. And the story, the way I've written it, is really about those last 3 months while a father is battling to save his son from committing suicide. And it was very painful for me to write that chapter because I had to relive all the scenes that happened and what I saw and felt and expressed. But I thought it was very important for people to know that, to know what happens in such situations. And I just told it like it was. I had to relive that, so it was very painful to write about it. But I did because I had to honor his memory. I had to respect his decisions. And I felt that it's important that people learn from that what to do in situations like that. He was a very, very special boy and a very, very tragic death. But in the end, life goes on. The wound slowly heals, but the scars always remain. Scars always remain. And he continues to be a part of my life. He continues to be a part of my life. I think of him every so often. Recently I was down in Goa celebrating my daughter Pooja's birthday, and of course I thought of him because they were like almost like twins.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've actually, I have 20 more questions, but time. So if there are any questions from the audience, I'm sure Kabir will be very happy to answer.
Let me just take out a minute, because I do want to share the story of my parents.
Of course, the questions there sitting there shown, because what a riveting story. It all began there, I guess.
Because there was such a seminal influence on my life, my philosophy, my outlook of life and everything. Because here were a young man from Punjab who went to Oxford on a scholarship. He meets an English girl who's also there on a scholarship. They fall in love, and they're all passionate about the welfare of the downtrodden and the poor, etc., etc. And they sort of part of the leftist group in Oxford. And my father proposes to my mother, saying, I love your ideals, and I want you to marry me, but I can't promise you any security because I'm going back to India to fight your people, the British, and you'll probably spend all your time sitting outside jails waiting for me to come out. And she had resolved this conflict within her, and she said, I love England, I love my people, but I hate colonialism, and I will come with you. And she came to India. Now, temperamentally, they were very different. My father was this rabble-rousing communist who would trade unionist leader who would incite people to strikes and boycotts and all kinds of things. And my mother was far more peaceful, and she was actually picked by Gandhi to lead the Satyagraha in our hometown in Punjab, Dera Baba Nanak. And she led that, of course, huge news, an English woman, doing Satyagraha against the English. And this got her very well known in those days. But she was Indian in her heart in every single way. She never wore Western clothes from the time she came to India. She adopted India completely. She studied all religions because she was always searching for a religion in her life. And after the years of independence, she found her truth in Buddhism. And my father came from the Sikh tradition because Bedis are descendants of Guru Nanak. And he was the core of his beliefs were the Sikh values of tolerance, equality, seva, helping others. And that's where his socialism also came from. And he also found another calling, because he went through extraordinary psychic experiences, which I've detailed in my book, and which led to him becoming a very well-known philosopher in Italy, because various things took him to Italy before I even got there. And he got there 3 years before me, and he was a well-known name in Italy even when I got there. So, and yet this relationship between them, which was separated by geography, separated by beliefs, yet there was this bond between them.
And later emotionally also, because Babaji moved on, in a way.
Yes, he remarried and everything, but even after he married in Italy, in front of the chair, his favorite chair in the sitting room, was this huge picture of my mother in nun's robes, because she became a Buddhist nun. In fact, rose to becoming the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. And yet there was this extraordinary relationship between the two of them. So I thought I would mention this extraordinary story, which is one of the stories that I had to tell.
Absolutely. Any questions? I'm being told by my friend at JLF, we have 5 minutes. Anybody?
Please.
Namaste, sir. Namaste, ma'am. It was really a very internalizing session, yet revelating. Sir, as a musician, I admire your voice much more than anyone else on the planet could.
Oh, thank you.
Many namaskars to that. That being said, our society, for reasons still rife, is very judgmental, and people do not easily get out of that attitude since it's ingrained. What has been your bold takeaway of marriage as an institution, and what is the truth that you had been chasing in every single marriage in which it didn't work out? I don't want to know the personal reasons, I don't have any right to, but as a youngster, I want to know the truth that you really wanted to chase in any marriage.
Just a minute, darling, it's all there in the book. You should go get it about all the women.
Definitely, definitely.
Please do that, please do that.
Definitely.
But let me just say that, you know, if I'm ready to think about it, and I did in the course of the novel, because also writing the novel is not just a form of catharsis, it's also a form of self-reflection. And what I realized that was, throughout all my relationships, there was this desire to be loved. Desire to be loved, which changed in various ways. And even when circumstances were external, like for instance with Nikki, on my way back from Hollywood, we were in London, she wanted to stay there, I wanted to stay in Bombay. I tried for 3 years back and forth, eventually it didn't work, so we went our separate ways. But if the one thing that I've wanted is the feeling of being in a relationship and being loved in that relationship and giving love in that relationship, that need for love and being in love has always been part of me. And I suppose that's one of the factors that drives me through from one relationship to the other, strange as that may sound. But that search was a very important search, and is a very important search. And now that I'm married to Parveen, I feel I found love in a wonderful form. And so I got there finally. It took me a little time, but here I am. And marriage as an institution, it's hard to be judgmental. Let me say, it's a thing that a lot of people do for reasons of love or even arranged marriages for social reasons, and I think it's a beautiful institution. But it's not a mandatory thing. You don't have to get married because society says so. You don't have to get married because your parents say so. You don't have to get married because somebody you happen to fall in love with says you have to get married. And a lot of people get married for the wrong reasons, and I think that's a reason for a lot of unhappiness in this world. Because they get married too quickly, or not thinking it through enough, or feeling obligated or pressured by others. So marriage is something that has to be approached with the greatest of thought and care, because it is a relationship you're choosing for life. You will be with that person through thick and thin, through good and bad, through their weaknesses and your weaknesses and your strengths and their strengths. Be very careful with who you commit to spend the rest of your life. It should not be an impulsive decision. It should not be even an emotional decision. It should be a very well thought out decision, if that's one thing I can share with people. Because I also got married at times for the wrong reasons, at times because I got over emotional, whatever. And not to say I didn't gain for those things, but in retrospect, knowing what I know today, would I have entered many of those relationships? I probably would not have. So, treat marriage with the extreme seriousness and care that it deserves, because it is a profoundly affecting lifetime decision. And it's wonderful when it works, and it works for a large majority of people as a system of social functioning. But for people who have an individual view of life, a desire to be different, who don't feel the impulse to be married, let it not be a compulsion. It's too important for that.
Yeah, we done? No. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. So, Kabir, one of my favorite quotes of Einstein is this idea that you have to give up who you are in order to become who you will. And the beginning of the interview, you touched upon the fact that you might have still been at that Indian radio channel if they hadn't destroyed your tape. Could you... have you sort of reflected on the fact that you've given up things in your life and sort of created that sort of space? It's a bit like, you know, if you have a full glass of water, you can't put any more water into it. Whereas, of course, if you empty it, then new water can go in. Have you reflected upon that in terms of this idea of sliding doors, where if you hadn't left, and because you seem to be someone, not just with women, but also with your career, who makes decisions and moves on to new stages. And has that ever come to your mind? Because I think as we progress in our lives, quite often we make decisions. It may not be about the women in our lives, but it may be about what we do, and it's sometimes difficult to make that change. We sometimes may not be happy with the existence, but we stay in that rut for a little bit too long.
Right. Well, certainly. You know, leaving Delhi was, for instance, for me, an important decision because of the way I felt I'd been treated by All India Radio. But it's very difficult to leave because that's the city where I grew up. That's where my friends were. That's where my family was. I didn't know anything about Bombay. So I chose to give up that part of it to seek out a new destiny. So in that sense, Einstein was right. When I joined advertising, I was doing very well. I was the head of film and radio at first Lentas and then what the company today known as Ogilvy and Mather. And I could have done very well in advertising. And I had to give that up for the insecurity of the film industry. And God knows what happened there. And it was a rocky road to go down. It was difficult in the beginning as well. And then again, when the Italians called, I took the chance of leaving because, you know, films in India were shot in a way whereby few days this month, few days next month, we would make films on the installment plan. And so to say to your producers that I'm going away for 6 months to shoot an Italian series meant you were out of the industry. So I had to give up the security, what I knew was developing in the Hindi film industry, to choose the insecurity of whether this European series will be a success or not. And then again, in Italy, my success was so great that directors couldn't think of casting me as anything else. And so I realized I had to move beyond Italy, go on to Hollywood and other places, prove myself as a versatile actor to them before they cast me, which is what happened in the end. But again, I had to give up something to aspire for something. So you're right in the sense of what Einstein said, but let me end with what Darwin said. Darwin said the species that survive are not the strongest or even the most intelligent. They are the species that learn to adapt. And so in making that transition from the known to the unknown, what you have to do is develop the art of adapting to each new situation. When I went to Italy, I was parachuted in from the sky because my series was such an extraordinary hit. I didn't know the who's who of the town. And so, you know, people like Gino would have been very useful for me to find out more about the industry. But you have to adapt because industries are different, people are different, the way they do business is different, the way America makes films is totally different to the way Europe or India makes films, the way India makes films is totally different. So adaptation is equally important, a part of one's journey in life. And those adaptations are not automatic or easy. You have to make a conscious effort to make that change and adaptation. And therefore, yes, you have to give up something to gain something, but you also have to learn the art of adapting to make a success of it.
Hi, this is me. Namaskar, namaskaram, sat sri akal, salam alaikum to each and every one of you. I'm Usha Uttup, and I've been singing for 53 years. It's absolutely brilliant to see you again, Kabir, and it's one of my favorite stories, but I don't think it features in yours. But I will always remember that one of my favorite tales to everybody is Do you remember coming to Trinkas
Yeah.
in Calcutta?
Absolutely.
Do you remember Amitabh Bachchan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now, these were the people who used to come to listen to me in the nightclub, okay? Kabir Bedi. And I keep saying it to everybody with so much of pride.
Yeah.
Two baritone voices, the one much better known just now as Kabir than the other who is known as Amitabh Bachchan. And it's so fantastic for me to be able to say to all of you, as a nightclub singer, you used to have a favorite table in Trinkas.
Right.
And I keep telling this story to everyone, and I have tears in my eyes as I say, because that is one of the stories I must tell you, because you've forgotten that. But I made you remember it, because for me, you know, and for the entire industry, you were already known because I did the Jagjit Singh Tinopal ad for you in Bombay. It was an ad which says, "Itne ujle kapde kiska hai kamal, Tinopal." Yeah, everybody knows that. So
We all know that.
yes, and I've worked with Kabir Bedi, and it's been one of my favorite stories, you know, having you in my audience. And I thank you for that. It hardly matters to me who you were with. It didn't matter to me why you were with them. It just didn't matter nothingness. It just mattered that we shared music together, and I was able to bring a smile on your face. When I sang one of your favorite songs, those were the days.
Right.
You remember that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Usha, thank you for all the joy you've given us, not just now, but for generations, for decades. And you have been creating this marvelous music, and then become a symbol of somebody who not only is a great artist, but endures, because that's one of the greatest challenges for an artist, to reinvent and rediscover yourself, and let audiences discover and rediscover you over time. And I think, Usha, you're a shining example of that, and I salute you for that.